Greetings, adventurers, and welcome back to the Den of the Drake. Other dragons hoard gold, while I hoard internet cringe. If you've watched my last video, and if you haven't, what the hell are you doing, you will have noticed that I'm on a bit of an AITA kick. Normally, I like to stick to the longer stories and skip the shorter ones, but I'd be lying if I didn't find myself enjoying the bite-sized RPG horror stories and AITA posts more and more. I feel like I can provide better quality commentary when half the post isn't just introducing characters that contribute as much to the story as AI bros contribute to the creative space. Not a goddamn thing. But while I was collecting AITA stories for last week's video, like Destiny's wife collects boyfriends, I stumbled across an anomaly. An Am I the Asshole post that was long enough and nuanced enough for its own video. So why the hell not? We're about to tread into untrod territory, people, so buckle your seatbelts. Daddy Drake is taking you for a ride off the edge of a cliff. The story I have for you today stars a player who's trying their hand at a game of Pendragon, only to have their DM all but beg them to marry one of their precious NPCs. But since this is an AITA post, it's a bit more nuanced than that. Now, without any further delay, let's go ahead and dive right back into the judgmental side of r/RPG horror stories. Enjoy. This week's story comes from Reddit user Proper Author 9800 and is titled AITA, Complication with a Romance Arc. I am honestly unsure how well this qualifies for an RPG horror story, as technically speaking, I'm not even sure anyone is a problem player, and the situation has yet to truly degenerate. But I do feel like getting it off my chest, and more importantly, I'm unsure how to feel about it, so let's share. TLDR at the end. I have been, for years now, part of a Pendragon campaign organized by a friend. For those among you who don't know, Pendragon, as suggested by the name, is an RPG game letting you play as knights in the Arthurian mythos. Now, a key part of the game is that you aren't technically playing as characters, but as a bloodline, which is followed over multiple generations from Uther Pendragon to King Arthur. You start as a character, then when reaching the point where your character is dead or has to retire, you move on to their child, and so on. As such, it's kinda expected for your character to get married and have children in order to pursue the game. You can, of course, just adopt or have an unrelated character take over, but the default assumption is that you'll get married and have children. We were all made aware of this before joining the game and agreed to it. This is important. Now, we're currently during the early period of King Arthur, and our characters are around their 30s. Two of them, including my own, Ser Cadell, are part Fae. During one session, we were invited to a gala organized by the Summer Court, where Cadell's mother and my previous character, Lady Ellery, officially agreed to become full Fae and join the court. This, in turn, led to King Oberon summoning our current half-Fae character, and discussing their futures with them. Upon talking to them, he decided that our characters couldn't be trusted to join the court like Lady Ellery, as they were still immature or not acting responsible enough to handle territories and stuff like that. Point is, he imposed a condition for us to join in the future. We had to get married, preferably with someone from the Summer Court. Now the other player decided to begrudgingly go along with it and went to look for a spouse. Me, not so much. This was mostly an in-character thing. The way I saw it, Cadell was very much the celibate, in love with adventures and epic tales of the drifting hero kinda guy, and didn't care much for attachments or domains. To him, marriage was the beginning of the end and meant settling down with children, which he didn't want. Childish, I know, but I saw it as a character flaw. Add in the fact that his brother had been more or less conned into marriage with a Fae lady one session before. Add in the fact that this whole go and find a spouse thing was forced on him by Oberon, and I felt like he had plenty of reasons to not want to obey. As such, he spent the gala walking around, exploring the palace, drinking, and generally actively avoiding looking for a spouse. That was when he was approached by a Fae NPC named Lady Cal. Now, we had met Lady Cal a few sessions ago as an emissary of Oberon in the human world, and interacted with her a few times. She had been overall friendly and helped us every now and then. I never thought much of her one way or the other, and only discussed with her a couple of times as far as I remembered. Regardless, my characters needed to vent, and told her about what had happened, mentioning that he had no intention to look for a spouse and was annoyed at the situation. So the DM asked me for an intrigue check. Basically the equivalent of empathy or insight. I rolled and got a critical failure, to which I was completely fine with, since in my mind, Cadell was also pretty oblivious to that sort of thing. DM, re-roll. Me, why? I'm fine with the result. DM, re-roll. That took me a little aback. To be clear, our DM would occasionally allow us to re-roll checks if he felt like it was too important to let us fail, or if he felt generous after seeing us fail too many times. But this was the first time he demanded one of us to re-roll, despite me being completely fine with the result. Eventually I shrugged and just re-rolled. Regular failure. He seemed to settle for this and just vaguely mentioned that she seemed a bit relieved. Cadell and Kyle talked for a bit, and the rest of the gala went okay, with Oberon begrudgingly allowing our characters more time to pick a spouse, though it was pretty obvious that he had not dropped it. Now, I am a bit of an oblivious person IRL too, but the incident above did make me wonder if the DM was trying to pair my character up with Lady Cal. Not wanting to make assumptions too early, I shrugged it off and moved on. Later, however, Lady Cal was officially named Oberon's ambassador and sent to spend time at King Arthur's court, meaning we interacted with her much more. This led to a few more situations where the DM would have her try and talk or interact with me more often. Though again, I didn't want to make assumptions. All doubts dropped in a later session though, when following an ambush by fanatical Fae-hating monks, Cadell and one of our Fae allies were struck with crossbow bolts, which turned out to carry black ichor, a very rare and powerful poison that was deadly to those of Fae blood. Lady Cal was able to take us to some hag-like witch who knew how to cure it, but would only do so in exchange for her true name. As anyone familiar with Fae lore could tell you, telling someone your true name is a big deal for them. It basically grants power over you to whoever you told it to. Lady Cal gave hers without a second thought. The witch appeared confused about it at first, but then looked at my character and nodded, saying, "Ah, I see," before curing both of us. At this point, while it had not been said out loud, even my dumbass oblivious self could say for sure Lady Cal was meant to have a crush on my character. Now, to be clear, I wasn't hostile to the idea of a romance per se. As I had said previously, I had agreed to the terms when joining the game. I didn't particularly dislike Lady Cal either. I thought she was a fine character from the few times I had interacted with her, and she had been nothing but friendly to our party. Heck, on paper, I wasn't even hostile to a romance between her and Cadell, but the way the DM had gone with it, kinda rubbed me the wrong way. As far as I could tell, she had barely interacted with Cadell before the gala, and I had not noticed any signs that she might feel anything toward him until that point. It frankly felt like my DM had been going, well, if he won't pick one, I'll pick one for him, and then had her spontaneously develop these feelings out of nowhere. I couldn't help but be a bit irritated, and that probably tainted my reaction. After this incident, I decided that while Cadell was now aware of these feelings from Cal, it wouldn't be as simple as him immediately returning them. He still saw her as an acquaintance and little more, and this whole thing somewhat weirded him out, scared him even. So I intended to play him as distant towards her for a while, maybe a little cold to represent his unease. For a few sessions, that wasn't an issue, as the DM focused on progressing the main story and didn't really give any RP moments that could have involved her directly. But things changed when we made our way back from Rome, and somehow ended up on Circe's island. Yes, that Circe from Greek mythology. Long story. As we met the legendary witch, she was apparently pissed by having intruders and unleashed snakes on us, which immediately went and surrounded Lady Cal. The DM then asked me specifically, even though all the other players were here, how Cadell reacted. I stated that he had no reaction, and he just silently watched the events unfold. That seemed to confuse the DM, as he immediately asked me the reason for this. I decided to justify it by arguing that, given his knowledge of how Fae worked at this time, Cadell figured that this was just some sort of ceremony, and it was best to see where it went first rather than risk starting a fight for no reason. This wasn't entirely unfounded. Lady Cal had made it clear that she knew this place as we arrived. The DM reacted by giving me a cross in pragmatic. As it turned out, my guess ended up correct. Lady Cal turned out to be Cersei's niece, and as soon as they identified one another, the enchantress dropped the aggression and allowed us to stay for a while. As she invited us for supper, with a promise to Cal that she wouldn't turn us into pigs, we ended up discussing, and more hints were dropped of Lady Cal's crush on Cadell, which Cersei did not miss. She talked to each of us, and when she came to Cadell, he ended up mentioning his story at the gala with Oberyn trying to pressure him into a marriage. At this point, Cersei asked him if he really had no one he'd be interested in romantically. I had him answer no, without an ounce of hesitation. I think that answer was taken with a general ouch around the table. The DM asked all characters except Cadell to do an intrigue check, and to those who succeeded, including a critical success, he declared that Lady Cal looked like she had just been stabbed in the heart. A couple of the players appeared to feel sorry for her and even talked about giving her comfort. The meal proceeded as normal. Then Cersei and Lady Cal withdrew to discuss, letting us walk around the island for a bit. At this point, the two players most prone for being troublemakers decided to go spy on the conversation between Cersei and Cal. They caught glimpses of the former offering the latter a vial of a liquid, which she reluctantly took. Though they didn't catch the whole dialogue, it was pretty obvious the vial was a love potion, and Cersei was pressuring Cal into using it on Cadell. Nonetheless, the players opted to not go warn me, and instead returned to search for places where they could cause trouble. Soon after the focus came back on me, my character decided to go for a walk, and the DM had it lead me to the beach, where of course he found Lady Cal alone, looking at the sea with the vial in hand. I declared that I had Cadell walk past her and avoid her. At this point, the players were actually starting to find it either funny or sad. The DM flat out declared Cadell was just being a lout to her. Feeling a bit guilty, I decided to compromise and agreed to have him instead just sit nearby, while still keeping his distance and avoiding dialogue or eye contact. Eventually, Lady Cal addressed him and asked if he hated her. Cadell answered that no, like I said before, just because he didn't reciprocate her feelings didn't mean that he disliked her either. At this point, she threw the vial in the sea, turned around, and revealed that she was in tears. She confirmed that the vial was indeed a love potion for him, but declared that she didn't want to get him this way. At this point, I felt like Cadell just refusing to talk further would have been way too dickish, so I had him actually talk this out with her. He admitted that he had been aware of her feelings ever since the Black Ichor incident, but didn't understand why she loved him, given as far as he was concerned, they didn't even know each other that much. He then admitted that he still felt grateful toward her for saving his life, albeit guilty that she had sacrificed so much for him, and that while he didn't love her back the way she did at the moment, nor could he force it, he still cared about her enough to not want to hurt her. So he offered that they stayed friends for now and see where it would go after that, and she agreed, albeit still sad. They then stayed to watch the sea together for a bit, and the rest of the session went without involving this romance. Now, so far, I had not once expressed my concerns to the DM, as I was afraid he might react poorly or not care. But friends outside of the game had been hearing me narrate this, and urged me to go talk with him. So, I did. I went to see him after the session and expressed all of my grievances. The answer wasn't quite what I expected. On a positive note, he clarified to me that no matter what happened, Cal would have never used the love potion. This wasn't Cal's style, and he himself is a big believer of love potions never working out well. So at least that was a relief. When I expressed my concern about him forcing these out of nowhere feelings from Lady Cal, though, he kinda took it personally. He told me that he had actually intended for her to have feelings for Cadell since as far as their first appearance, and I had just not noticed the hints back then, unlike, according to him, all the other players. He said that if he wanted to force a marriage upon me, he would have just had Oberyn drag me to the altar in an arranged marriage, and that he took offense to being accused of doing this, considering how he put a lot of effort into fleshing out the characters and romance. We ended the conversation on a relatively calm note, but I could sense that he was still irritated. So, yeah, now I feel kinda guilty for misjudging the intentions of my DM and maybe overreacting for a good chunk of the game as a result. Hence, I decided to bring this story here. I have done my best to summarize it objectively without being too biased in my favor. So, tell me guys, am I the asshole in this? TLDR, The DM seemingly shoves a romance subplot onto my character that I feel came out of nowhere, causing me to act more reluctant towards it as the game goes on. Eventually, I bring my grievances to him only for him to react offended and reveal to me that I had a completely wrong impression. Okay, let me start off by saying that I appreciate this OP going out of their way to try and make this story as unbiased as possible. Usually it's the knee-jerk reaction of most Redditors to title their story something like, "DM literally bends me over the table and spanks me until I cry, not clickbait," before spending 17 paragraphs trying to convince you that the DM making them roll at disadvantage one time is actually a hate crime. OP's attitude is definitely appreciated, because we often forget that in the context of our relationships with others that we get out what we put in. Of course, that is not always the case, but in an age where it is severely lacking, self-awareness like what we see in this story soothes like an ointment on a particularly gross rash. However, this is where my kindness for OP starts to take a downward spiral. So, I've never played Pendragon, but going off of what was written here, it sounds a lot like OP's being a bit of a contrarian for the sake of being a contrarian, considering how lineages play a pretty big part in what makes this game work. I mean, yeah, it's never a good thing to force a player to do something they don't want to do, but at some point you gotta look at the player and be like, "Come on, dude, work with me here." Imagine playing a Vampire the Masquerade game and having a player get pissed off because they never consented to drinking blood. The f***? For the most part, it seems like this DM is genuinely trying to tell a good story here. You've made it clear that one of your character's flaws is that they don't want to settle down because of their love for adventure. And Lady Cal is an NPC that is specifically created to highlight that aspect of your character. You don't gotta marry her, but the least you can do is engage. DM could have easily forced you into a relationship, whether it be with the love potion or with an arranged marriage. But instead, he keeps setting you up with powerful scenes like with Cal throwing the love potion away. The dude keeps giving you layups, but you've convinced yourself that you're playing volleyball, so every time you get the ball, you decide that you're gonna spike the fucking thing instead of going for the dunk. Yeah, no one can force you or your character to develop feelings for an NPC. That would be weird and invasive. However, you gotta work with your DM here, who so far seems like a pretty chill guy, with the exception of a few cases. The most egregious instance was him point-blank commanding you to re-roll because he didn't like the results. That seemed a bit scummy. At that point, why even bother with the dice if you're just gonna keep rolling until you get a number you like? I mean, for f***'s sake, dude, there's a reason why casinos charge you to use the slot machine. And at the end of the day, if one of your players isn't feeling something that you set up, it's not good form to keep throwing it at them until they roll over and go with it. I'm not gonna make a ruling just yet, because I'm sure you've already guessed, but there's a part 2. How about we go ahead and see what our lover boy is up to, shall we? Part 2 is titled Complication with a Romance Arc. Part 2. DM railroads me by holding NPC at gunpoint. Hello. A while ago, I posted a story under AITA regarding a Pendragon game. For those who don't feel like reading it, it basically boiled down to a conflict with the DM trying to set up my character, Ser Cadell, a half-Fey knight of the Round Table, with Lady Cal, a Fey lady, and Cadell not reciprocating the feelings. I had then talked with the DM and complained about the romance feeling forced. The previous session had ended with Cadell and Cal more or less agreeing on staying friends and seeing where it would go from there. And I was hoping that from there things could go a bit more naturally. Then last night's session happened. Now at this point our characters had been back at the court of King Arthur a session ago, and not much had happened, aside from the rules for courtly love being put in place. From there, a council was organized by the Christians to discuss if Fae should or should not be accepted as equal to humans. My character, being a devout Christian but also a half-Fae with strong sympathy for the Fae, of course took part and was really invested. He couldn't stay long, however, as soon after that, one of the other players, Sir Elias, came to look for him. He revealed that Lady Cal was currently at his domain, and dying. Cadell naturally had to leave the council and go back to his domain to check what was going on. As it turned out, Lady Cal had taken the rejection even more badly than I expected. Apparently, all of Cadell's insistence that he still cared for her, just not the way she wanted, had fallen on deaf ears. Because she basically was convinced that he didn't need her, and had entered a state called melancholia. From what I understand, this was basically her letting herself die of grief over this, with her slowly falling asleep and turning into plants. On top of that, it turned out her brother, who was apparently a powerful Fey Lord, was absolutely pissed about this, and was now threatening to start a war with the kingdom if she wasn't saved. After a slightly uncomfortable interaction where one of the female PCs basically called out Cadell for being insensitive about Cal's feelings towards him, and basically tried to push him to be honest with his feelings, Sarah Elias explained that he had used magic to see glimpses of the future, and according to him, there were only 3 possible options to fix this mess. Either Cadell returned her feelings and expressed it, making her recover, he died along with her, or he agreed to become her champion and carry her colors in the next tournament as a part of courtly love. So, to recap, the DM had just created a situation where the love interest he set up for my character would not only literally die, but also cause a war if I didn't have my character either die along with her, return her feelings, or be forced in a situation that I had no doubt was intended to lead them into a romance in the long term, despite players assuring me courtly love didn't actually engage in anything. I was livid. To be clear, I want to clarify something that I didn't quite make clear in my previous post, judging by some answers. I wasn't hostile to a Cadell-Cal romance on paper. I just didn't feel like he'd immediately return her feelings given the current situation, especially given his personal rejection of romance in character. My preference would have been that they would have gotten to know each other better over future sessions, giving Cadell time to grow out of his flaw and maybe appreciate her that way. But this was just railroading, and not even subtle at that. And frankly, I didn't want a romance that would have started on such a basis, because in my opinion, starting a relationship based on "I'll die if you don't" can't be healthy. I was really tempted to stop and leave right there, but I didn't want to ruin the game for the others. So I settled for waiting until the end of the session and then talked it out with the DM. The game persisted, and Cadell tried to appease Cal, insisting that just because he didn't return her feelings didn't mean he didn't care about her, that he didn't want her to die. None of these words seemed to help, and I really got the impression the DM wasn't going to have them work unless Cadell confessed to her right now, which I refused to do. Cadell is a very honest person and wouldn't want to lie to her, even in this context. Eventually, he did manage to make her feel slightly better by calling her by her true name, the same she had revealed to save his life before, and revealing that he still remembered it. That wasn't quite enough to snap her out of it, but it did do enough for the other Fae to be able to stabilize her at least. The session ended there. That was when I decided to confront the DM about it. I told him in no uncertain terms that I was considering leaving the game. For context, that's something I very rarely consider. I only ever left a game of my own initiative once before, as I usually prefer sticking to the end. So me saying this was not to be taken lightly. I pointed out that this was railroady and he was forcing me into this romance. His reaction only infuriated me more. He didn't seem to see anything wrong with it, and in fact, kinda talked to me like I was throwing a tantrum. He told me that he wasn't railroading, but just applying the logical consequences to my actions, and that he'd just have forced me to roll passion and be done with it if he really wanted to force me into this. He also added something that boiled down to, "This is what Lady Cal would do," saying that he wasn't just gonna change her character just so Cadell and her could stick to just being friends. He even told me that I technically had a choice, because I could pick the option that led to her death and war if I wanted to. At this point, I had enough. It was obvious that he wasn't only not open to conversation, but he didn't even see anything wrong about what he did. It's not even like he was being a creep about it. This romance arc basically was just a story tool to him. I left the call. That was last evening, and I haven't yet confirmed I was leaving the game, though I'm still considering it. Frankly, I'd much rather talk this out with him and fix this. Barring this bullshit The game has been a lot of fun. Moreover, I feel sorry for one of the players, who ended up caught in the middle of our arguments and is desperately trying to reconcile us. The poor guy panics whenever his friends fight, and he's been pretty clear to me that if I leave, he'd probably follow too, as this would taint the whole thing for him. We're the only 2 players left to have been there since the start, so that probably would be a major blow. Frankly, I'm unsure what to do about this anymore. Edit. Since a lot of people have been urging me to leave and wondering why I'm even sticking around, I feel like I should give some context to explain why it's not that simple. This isn't some random game I joined by finding it on the internet. Not only is this game gone for years by now, but it's on a Discord server we created between friends to collectively organize our RPG tables. This game's DM, the friend I mentioned, and myself are the 3 primary DMs on this server. We routinely gather together to organize our weekly games, and we are players at each other's tables. We generally interact on a daily basis to take care of this server. Even if I were to leave this game, I'd still have to keep interacting with this DM regularly, which would make things uncomfortable if we didn't reconcile. We also have been friends for years, and this is the first serious fight we had in a while on the topic, so yeah, it's complicated. New edit/update. Not much progress yet. I haven't talked to the DM since then, and he hasn't made any move to talk to me. But the player I mentioned, along with the other player, are trying to act as mediators and trying to suggest solutions. One of them suggested retroactively adding what he calls flashback scenes that'll show more of the interactions between Cadell and Cal before all of these incidents, which would allow the pair to better flesh out their relationship. Personally, I appreciate the effort, though I'm a bit iffy as this could retroactively make Cadell's behavior seem nonsensical. Still, it seems like we're heading to a discussion to at least try fixing the whole thing. Second update. I had the talk with the DM, with a friend serving as the mediator. I clearly expressed what my problems were and why I had these problems, as well as the reasons why the solutions presented did not fit me. We discussed several possible solutions, including having Cersei come to save Lady Cal, albeit with negative consequences, retconning away the last few sessions, or having him become her champion in courtly love to save her, but then have her develop a romance with someone else. We hadn't quite reached a decision yet, but we do seem to all agree that the best solution is to do the flashback sessions to retroactively flesh out the two's relationship, as explained in previous edits. Then have Cadell snap Cal out of her melancholy without any engagement. Basically, just a speech reminding her that she's still cared for, and should not let herself be crushed by this. From there, the characters could move on, and we could have a proper development where the two might be able to build a healthier relationship if this works out. I personally find this solution acceptable, and probably the best option we can come up with. However, by the end of the discussion, the DM informed me that from now on, he would no longer program anything of his own when it came to romance arcs, and that he'd leave it up to me to decide. And that honestly made me feel a bit guilty. I got the impression that that whole quarrel had taken a blow to his confidence as a DM, and he no longer felt like he could handle this. Plus, if we're being completely honest, if he really does that, my following characters probably will never have any romance at all. I suck at taking initiative on that sort of thing. I'm debating returning to see him to talk about this again. In the meantime, thank you for all your opinions. These have all been very helpful.
I'm just applying logical consequences to your actions, off.
When I tell the chick at the bar that we might not be compatible, the last thing I'm worried about is her turning into a ficus. DM really turned the railroading up to 11 in part 2. Look, I get forcing your players to make difficult choices. Role-playing games are a fun way to explore moral and ethical quandaries in a way that isn't gonna net you a war crime. But presenting it like this feels kinda weird to me. The DM has a story that they want to tell, but refuses to allow the players to have any say in it. Yeah, I get that the DM was trying to push the players towards a tournament arc, and who doesn't love a good one of those? But that kinda sets the precedent of Cal being able to guilt the player into doing anything she wants.
Oh, honey, you didn't take out the trash. Oh,
I'm turning into a bush!
In part 1, I did think that OP was a bit of an asshole, but the fact that they had a consistent desire to talk it out won them some brownie points. But I can imagine that it might not feel too good that the DM's reaction to being told, hey, I'm not vibing with this, was to say, okay, vibe with this or I'm gonna make the whole setting implode in on itself. Get wrecked, loser. However, just because the DM kicked their assholery into top gear doesn't mean our OP doesn't have their hand on the clutch. I did a bit of research in between parts about what Pendragon is all about, and apparently it's actually supposed to be a bit more railroady than most RPGs, because you're very closely tied to the King Arthur mythos and the themes within. Hell, it's literally got the slogan, a game of quest, romance, and adventure on the box. Plus, while the DM does have some railroady tendencies, he's not forcing you to do anything. Taking the old USA route and saying, it, let's go to war, maybe we can get some oil out of it, is a feasible option that the DM is 100% okay with doing. Going back to part 1, the DM keeps giving you opportunities to roleplay interesting story beats, and is, for the most part, allowing you to run with it. But again and again and again, you seem to be so against anything that challenges the status quo of the game or your character. At that point, why even bother playing such a narrative-heavy game if everything's just gonna stay the same until everyone decides to stop playing? This is a complicated one. OP is an asshole for having to be drugged, kicking and screaming to anywhere there's plot involved, and our DM's an asshole for being a railroad tycoon. That being said, I think this whole situation is very easily salvageable. But in the meantime, I want you to know that this cartoon dragon thinks that everybody sucks here. Now how about we take a look at this week's Gallery of the Drake before we wrap things up? This week's fan art comes from viewer George, who depicts the Drake spreading his majestic wings in glorious freefall. As you all know, I rule the skies, but I'm gonna be honest, the ground is another story.
I am fire. I am death. I am approaching the ground way too fast! Ow, motherfucker!
What? Why would someone throw away a perfectly good pack of corn dogs? Oh, that's why. Thank you again, George, for submitting your art. If you'd like to see your fan art featured in Gallery of the Drake, be sure to send it to the email in my About section. Fan art is my favorite part of doing YouTube, and it means the world to me that I can inspire artists like you to create artwork like this. With the story over and artwork displayed, we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and send in your fan art. And if you feel like supporting the channel further, my Patreon and merchandise links are in the description. I would like to thank you all for listening, and I hope to see you next time in the Den of the Drake.